Good evening. Welcome to tonight's STEM Café, Surviving and Thriving, How Businesses Are Innovating for Today and Tomorrow. Our STEM Cafés are brought to you by NIU STEAM in the Center for P20 Engagement at Northern Illinois University. Before I start, I would like to share with you that NIU STEAM has developed over 25 virtual summer camps, 1-week and 4-week camps. We have also received YEP funding for needs-based camp scholarships from DeKalb County Community Foundations for middle and high school students. In addition, we have received other funding for scholarships for out-of-county students. Please email me for additional information. I'm Dr. Judy Diamond, organizer of the STEM Cafés for the past 8 years, and your host for this evening. STEM Cafés are designed to connect the greater community to the latest research and hot topics, where adults eat, drink, and chat with experts. Tonight you will need to provide your own favorite snacks, drinks, and carryouts. We usually hold our monthly STEM Cafés in restaurants, and we look forward to getting back to those restaurants. In the meantime, several of our partner restaurants are offering specials for virtual STEM Café participants. Fatty's Pub and Grill in DeKalb is offering a 10% discount to anyone who mentions that they have attended our virtual STEM Café. The Open Range Southwest Grill in Sugar Grove, our partner for both adult and teen STEM Cafés, is offering $5 off any order if the person says that they attended our STEM Cafés. That will go on until July 15th. For those of you who have not attended our STEM Cafés, our format for the evening is as follows. Our speakers will talk for approximately an hour. During the talk and following the talk, you can send in your questions and comments. We know that there are many experts in the audience as well, so often our attendees add to the conversation with their comments and insight. We will end by 8 p.m. This cafe will be recorded. It will be posted on our website in about a week, as we need to make sure that we have closed captions so that it is accessible to all. Our next STEM Cafe will also be virtual. It is scheduled for Wednesday, June 24th at 6 p.m. Our topic is Backyard Wildlife, Urban Ecology and Conservation. Our speaker will be John Vanek, Urban Ecologist. Tonight, NIU STEAM is happy to bring you Surviving and Thriving, How Businesses Are Innovating for Today and Tomorrow. Tonight we have a panel of 4 speakers to lead us in this discussion. We will discuss how businesses are meeting the challenges of the current economy and how consumers are interacting with businesses and what changes we can expect. Our speakers will provide information on how businesses large and small, rural and urban, are responding to challenges and innovating for the future. What we knew a month ago is not necessarily relevant today and in the future. This time of uncertainty has caused us to push forward ideas that might have been on hold. It has forced us to find creative and more efficient ways of moving into the future. There is always something good that comes out of every situation. Let's find out about some of those innovative and creative ideas, some resources, and about public-private partnerships. I will tell you now about our 4 speakers. First, we have Dr. Maya Groza, NIU Associate Professor of Marketing. Her research interests include branding, online and television advertising, digital marketing, and social media. She oversees small business, client-based capstone projects such as creating a website for small business or running a PPC campaign for all students in the Master of Science in Digital Marketing program. Dr. Carl Campbell, our second speaker, is our NIU Economics Professor and current Chair of the Economics Department. He received his BA in Economics from Swarthmore College, his PhD in Economics from Princeton University. His areas of specialization are macroeconomics and labor economics issues. Dr. Norman Walzer has his PhD in economics and is senior research scholar in the NIU Center for Governmental Studies and is founding director of statewide Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs. He is widely published on rural economic development issues and currently chairs the subcommittee for economic development and infrastructure for the Governor's Rural Affairs Council. His current research involves finding innovative ways to attract capital to retain or reopen essential businesses in small rural communities using community-supported or reopened enterprises. Our final speaker, Dr. Federico Ciamarella, serves as the president and CTO of MXD, Manufacturing and Digital, where innovative manufacturers go to forge their futures. In partnership with the Department of Defense, MXD equips U.S. factories with the digital tools and expertise they need to begin building every part better than the last. As a result, approximately 300 partners increase their productivity and win more business. Dr. Ciamarella is in charge of developing and implementing the technology vision for the Institute. You might recognize Federico's name. He was previously an associate professor at Northern Illinois University, where he directed the advanced research in materials and manufacturing for more than 10 years, which generated over $2.5 million in funding and created a launch pad for many students and technologies in advanced manufacturing. He has a long list of publications and patents in laser-assisted machining and additive manufacturing. So with that, we're going to ask Maya to please begin. Maya?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for logging in and listening. I'm excited to hear from the other three gentlemen. I'm just waiting for, here it is, the slides to come up. I'm going to share with you actually some data from a recent survey that was conducted right here in DeKalb County. So I am Maya Prądzinski-Groza, and I'm an associate professor here at NIU. And when the stay-at-home order came to exist over 2 months ago, a couple of us from the university got together with local small business owners, chamber members from across DeKalb County, and said, let's form a task force to do something to really focus on our small businesses. So DeKalb County Unites was created, and it actually stands for Universities and Neighbors Investing Together for Economic Success. So some of the initiatives that our group did was put on 24 webinars like this over the last 2 months on varying issues for small businesses. I did one here on April 29th, 2020 for DeKalb County Unites, and they asked Dr. Jacques Somis and myself to talk about how to reach and retain customers in a post-lockdown environment. So I was doing all this research and finding the Boston Consulting Group has been great putting out data on what consumers are thinking and feeling. But how they were labeling DeKalb is as a rural area, which I would argue that we are. But the idea came about then to actually create our own consumer sentiment survey and collect data right here in DeKalb County. So IRB exempt status was obtained on May 12th, and we created a survey quickly and actually gathered data May 19th to the 24th of 2020 here. And we reached people through social media, email, text, and radio. So I want to share with you some of the sample demographics. so that kind of frames our thinking. So huge thank you to the DeKalb County residents. 1,001 respondents participated in the survey, and for being a scholar who does survey research, I can tell you that that is an incredible response rate. So thank you to everyone in DeKalb that participated in this. As you can see, a breakdown of the ages is the largest groups were kind of that 35 all the way up to 55 years old. The sample here was heavily weighed towards female. We were actually 76% females responded to this. But anecdotally, I kind of have talked to some people where they said, oh, I got the, our family got it, but my wife took it. So you can, I feel like we're still kind of in that representative. 70% were married. 46% of this sample had children living at home. The one thing that surprised me was this is a very highly educated sample that participated in the survey. 56% had attained a 4-year bachelor's degree or more. I believe the national average is around like 35-ish. So yes, very highly educated group that participated. And 48% were paid employees working 30 or hours or more. And then we did have a strong you can see 65 years old and 75 years old up. They're not working, retired. So 17% was kind of the next big group of people participating. Some things that we really kind of wanted to know about from a consumer living during these last couple of months is employment changes. So here you can see that 22% were actually already unemployed, and I'm thinking that that captures a lot of our retired folks, so they experienced no change. Also, there was 27% from this sample that experienced no change. They were employed and stayed working out of their home. So the people classified as essential business and essential workers. 24% then experienced a change in their employment, I would guess, everyday life. It changed in that they were now working from home. And then 7% sadly changed where they did become unemployed from this sample. So some good news here is 65% were actually still being paid the same amount of money, and even if we add in the 6% where people's pay increased. So there are, some industries and companies that have been doing very well during this time due to their relevance to consumers. And then, 21% have experienced a reduce in their income during this time. So I kind of wanted to share the sample first to frame our thinking as we talk about what this group of DeKalb County consumers are looking for from our small businesses as we continue to evolve and change every day. So this was one of the first questions asked in the survey, and it said, to what extent are you taking the following precautions to protect yourself from contracting the coronavirus? And I think the things to pay attention here is the 15% kind of saying that they are never wearing a face mask. So in anything, there's going to be consumers and people that just choose to go against guidelines, and that is sad, but it's something that we have to acknowledge, and how can we help move that needle and reduce that number. 77% too are saying that we are never avoiding physical stores. So we are not using delivery options, going grocery shopping as a part of our life. I haven't stopped that physical store environment. But then on the flip side, you see that 9%, kind of that 10% there, is saying that, I am avoiding physical stores. And that's what we kind of found, where people are utilizing delivery and new pickup options. Here's also how the survey started. We just wanted to kind of get to know how people were feeling. And the main emotions that were coming across from people is this feeling of being a lot more bored, the black side as you can see, and a lot less connected to each other. So that, I guess, you know, we're using technology like this to connect, but in a little way, I feel like this is kind of showing that consumers, even with the virtual options, still are desiring some of that physical oneness or togetherness. So next, and this leads us to one of the big findings from the survey, is this is truly an engaged DeKalb County consumer group. So they really do love local businesses. 41% said that they often go out of their way to shop at a locally owned small business here in DeKalb County. And 91% of people, of our consumers, said that they are willing to pay much more or somewhat more at a local small business. So this tells us that I'm looking at Paulson's here in Sycamore, that is a part of our downtown, that is a part of our lives. And the reasons that consumers said that they love to shop local is personalized experiences and the continual great customer service that they get, and for unique products and services, perhaps that they can get quicker by going to a local store rather than waiting for shipping to come. So there's some unique opportunities for our small businesses to really stay connected and offer unique and personalized services to consumers. And that's what consumers are desiring here. Another question then here, building, was 70% have said, yes, I have shopped with a local small business since the start of the stay-at-home order. And remember, this data is from May 19th to 24th, so I'm hoping that that stat has gone up since many small businesses were able to open their doors here within the last couple of days. So the reason here from the consumers was that they really want the small business to still be here when allowed to open back up, and that they recognize and acknowledge the financial challenge that businesses are going through, especially ones classified as non-essential during this time. So 37% said, yeah, I've wanted to financially support during this challenging time. So that kind of frames our small business thinking broadly, and then we really wanted to get at some information about dining out and a few grocery shopping and kind of how people are supporting restaurants specifically. So the data actually came in and showed that 18% was the right kind of mean where people were dining out for their meals, which seems considerably kind of less than most people were doing. I think a lot of families have gotten into the groove of just kind of eating at home, but there are, and I applaud our restaurants for becoming innovative. And pickup here, as you see, so pickup outside the building was not a previously option for a business. This was created in the last 2 months. And how neat that consumers are supporting that and really using that delivery mode from our restaurants. So that came as the main way that consumers are dining out. And then 27% said, yeah, we're going through a drive-through, but this was already established. And then 20% were going inside a building to use carryout, and 19% doing delivery, where the food coming to your home. And 4% of the DeKalb County consumers here who participated reported not dining out at all since the stay-at-home order began. Then we got a little bit deeper here with dining out and really wanted to know that primary reason why. Why were you dining out? Was it a craving for a specific food or save time? I got children in the background, and I had to do a lesson on letters, and we got through the alphabet, but we have no dinner. So I really kind of wanted to get at that primary reason. And at 46%, the top number was really the desire to support the small business owner's restaurant. And that has come about a lot in the survey, wanting to support the individual. Not necessarily what it can do for me as a consumer, but my awareness and thinking about the entrepreneur, the small business owner. So I think that's really neat. We also asked them kind of where they've eaten out, and this is not a cleaned up Wordle, because if the restaurant had 2 words, it separated them. But I think the main kind of dominant finding here is pizza. Pizza still stands strong as when we're going to dine out. It's easy to call, kind of goes across all age groups and consumer groups. So pizza has been utilized in the last 2 months. And next, kind of the third big finding of this survey results is, we really wanted to get at the recovery period and ask some of these questions about what activities people are planning to do. And here you can see overwhelmingly 73%, when given a pretty big litany of possible activities that they are excited to do in the first few weeks, 73% said, I want to get together with friends or loved ones in our homes. So again, that physical closeness is missing in people's lives, and they do desire to be in a 6 feet environment, but to be in a physical space with each other. 48% said that they're interested in dining out in a bar or restaurant. And 38% said, let's get out and shop in the stores. 36% then said, it's getting to be time for some travel for leisure. And then the next reported activities were go to church, temple, or mosque, visit the library, go to the gym. So these are the things that are on people's minds that they want to get out and do. And here were some specific questions about some projected future behaviors now. So 43% of respondents said that they are planning some travel, and we didn't clarify airplane or car or road trip, which I'm guessing that this is a lot of road trip, but through June through September, 43 respondents said, let's do some sort of summer travel. And I think that's interesting because people are kind of itching to go explore a little bit. The one kind of statistic that came about, and it made me a bit sad to see, but it's good to know that businesses can prepare, is only 6% of consumers reported that they would be ready to eat inside a building on opening day. So when this survey was created, we didn't even think about now the neat outdoor dining option. But when presented with the inside a building on May 19th to 24th, only 6% of consumers said that they'd be ready on opening day. This number does bump up to 41% of consumers looking to dine inside within 4 weeks. So I think one of the big takeaways here is that the recovery period might be a little bit slower than we hope, right? From a business perspective, we want consumers out there spending money and supporting, but I think what this is telling us is that it's going to come. It's going to just be a little bit more slow and steady. Another thing that kind of came across where consumers were very split here was participation in large group activities. So some consumers, 22%, said, you know what, I'll do that right away. I'll participate, and the options were like a downtown run or a festival or a sporting event. So 22% said, I feel comfortable right away. Well, I would say on the other side of the spectrum, 24% said, I'm going to need to wait until a vaccine is offered. So we're seeing a wide spectrum of consumers' kind of views and values come across here and their behaviors. The next thing, wanted to get at some real tangible checkpoints kind of that we can give our small businesses. So we asked them to rank order these 5 options about what are the things that you want to see from from small businesses when you go back out to purchase with them. And the big takeaway here is low contact pickup and delivery options. So 53% rank that first. And that was surprising to me, that this is kind of showing us that people have adapted to this new norm and actually really like that from a small business perspective, to have this pickup and delivery options. So that's kind of one of the last takeaways. And I'm actually going to jump here and just get the last main point of this survey, really showing the importance for small businesses of having a clear website and social media presence that consumers are desiring. At 61%, when they're an existing consumer, say that they want to connect with a local small business with social media. And here it came about from a marketing perspective too. 77 kind of prefer to learn about small businesses using social media too. So how important this is for our small businesses. And here, the big takeaway, the importance of a website. 70% strongly agree or somewhat agree that when a small business doesn't have a clear and up-to-date website, they actually find the business less credible. And this was across all age ranges. So it's really important for a small business to focus on this, and that's my role at NIU with our masters in digital marketing, is to really kind of get this out there, and we hope kind of in DeKalb County to help any small businesses.
Thank you, Maya. Our next speaker is Carol Campbell. Carol?
Okay, thank you. Well, obviously, COVID-19 has been devastating to the economy and to the world economy as well as the U.S. economy. But again, eventually its effects should go away. So it's likely that we either find a vaccine or develop an effective treatment or just develop herd immunity. So as a result, the economy should eventually recover from the recession or depression that we're in currently. But our experience with the COVID-19 is likely to have permanent effects on the way the economy operates. What I want to do is speculate on how our economy might be different in the future as a result of our experiences with this pandemic. But obviously, again, this is highly speculative. So I'll talk about how our experience with COVID might affect the behavior of individuals, businesses, and firms. So first of all, in terms of individuals, I think it's likely that we'll see migration away from urban areas, kind of for two reasons. First of all, during the pandemic, many individuals have been working from home, and as a result, they've developed the skills to work remotely. And in fact, many people seem to have enjoyed working from home and are happy to not have the commute. Secondly, when you look at where the COVID-19 cases have been concentrated, it's mainly been in urban areas. Just two examples. In New York State, about 43% of the population lives in New York City, but about 55% of COVID-19 cases have been in the city, and 72.5% of the deaths have been in New York City. In Illinois, 41% of the population lives in Cook County, but Cook County has accounted for 65.2% of the COVID-19 cases and 68% of the deaths. If you look at rural states, they've had much lower rates per capita of COVID-19. I think these two forces can cause a migration away from urban areas. First of all, people have been getting used to working remotely, and again, have developed the tools to do so. And also, I think people have a fear of living in urban areas, given how prevalent COVID-19 has been in those areas. So I think we'll likely see migration from urban areas to both suburban areas and rural areas. I kind of think the areas that might benefit the most are ones that are maybe an hour to an hour and a half away from urban areas. places like Yorkville or Marengo or Harvard or Sandwich, places like that. So workers could work remotely for maybe 3 or 4 days a week, but still come to the office, once or twice a week. If you're an hour and a half away, it's not too onerous to come in a few times a week. And also, if you live outside an urban area, you can still enjoy some of the amenities of urban life. One thing this should probably do is lead to a decline in housing prices in urban areas, and maybe an increase in housing values in rural and suburban areas. Another thing we might see as a result would just be an increase in college attendance. So between 2010 and 2018, college enrollment declined by about 6.5%. So some possible reasons is just, first of all, the increased cost of attending college, and also the strength of the job market. Because the job market was doing so well during this period, a lot of people chose to get a good paying job instead of taking out a loan to go to college. But recently, the job market has not been so good for people without a college education. So here are some statistics from most recent unemployment figures. So people with less than a high school degree had a 21% unemployment rate. People who graduated from high school but didn't go to college at all had a 17% unemployment rate. Some college or an associate with about 15%. A bachelor's degree or higher is much lower, 8.2%. So I think we might see the trend of college enrollments going down reverse as people realize that if there's a significant downturn in the economy, you're much better off having a college degree. Sort of a long-term trend that might be exacerbated is just the increase in income inequality in our country. So here's a graph of the share of total U.S. income going to the top 1%, and you can see it increased from 8.9% in the 70s to about 22% now. If you look at the top hundredth of 1%, it's even more striking. In the 70s, it was about less than 1%. Now it's about over 5%. Here's a graph of labor share of national income, percentage of our national income that goes to the workers as opposed to firm owners or people who invest in firms. We see a fairly sizable drop. This is an index. This is an index produced by the Federal Reserve. But if you look at the percentages, it's gone to from about 65% or 63% to about 58% of national income going to workers. So again, that's not been good for the average working person. So how could this be exacerbated by the present situation? First of all, there's a possibility of a lot of small business failures. Things like local restaurants, hardware stores, local retail establishments. Who would likely benefit from failures of small businesses? Well, probably large companies, because they can, invest on the bond. They can borrow in the bond market to tide them over during this difficult time, where small business owners don't have the same kind of resources to fall back on. We could see a decline in small businesses with large companies being the beneficiaries, which means that more of our nation's profits will go to owners of large businesses instead of small family-owned businesses. And also, if there are fewer firms in the economy, there'll be less competition for workers, and that would tend to reduce workers' wages. And also, workers are probably, might be willing to accept lower wages than previously because of the high unemployment we've experienced. So again, the rise in inequality that we've experienced over the past 40 years or so could become even more exacerbated as a result of COVID-19. Also, people might perceive the risk in the stock market differently, kind of in two ways. First of all, they might perceive a greater chance of recessions in the future, because here we have a recession that basically came out of nowhere, and just realizing that events that could not have been anticipated can cause a severe economic downturn. Again, making stocks riskier. Now, on the other hand, people might be more confident about the ability of the stock market to rebound from a recession. To give an example, during the previous recession in 2008, 2009, the stock market fell by 50% between October 2007 and February 2009. It didn't return to its pre-recession peak until February 2013, 5.5 years after it started to decline. Now, in the current recession, in spite of having much higher unemployment, the unemployment didn't reach 11% last time. Now it's about 17%, but the stock market fell less, only 37%, and it's kind of coming back fairly strongly. It's only 13% below its previous high. So it does seem people might feel the stock market is more likely to rebound following recession. So we have kind of two competing things: a greater probability of stock market declines, but also more optimism about the stock market to recover from these events. Okay, there are also some other ways that individuals might be affected. There might be an increase in online sales. Just to give an example, we like to have a glass of wine with dinner, but we didn't want to go out to liquor stores and risk contact, so we started ordering wine online. And actually, we found that it's much cheaper and you get a greater variety. So I think in the future, we're going to do most of our wine purchases online. And many people have probably found the same things. A lot of things you can buy more cheaply online than in person. So I think we'll see kind of a transition here, which will obviously hurt brick and mortar stores. Another way individuals might be affected is we might see fewer people choosing to enter a nursing home or retirement village. I think about a third of the deaths have occurred in nursing homes or retirement villages. So we might see a decline in people willing to enter one of these facilities and instead stay at home. Another thing that's been interesting is just people have been engaging in more remote connections. I've been through, I've never heard of Zoom, 4 months ago. Now I'm on Zoom all the time. Just to give an example, the rest of my family lives in Philadelphia. I live here. Don't get to see each other that much, but we've actually started Zooming each other. And it's really nice. It's not quite as good as being there in person, but it's a pretty close substitute. Now, traditionally, people want to, live near family, but maybe people are more willing to relocate, to a different state. Now they have, new means that to be together as a family. So I think it's a minor thing, but I think it's, could affect people's willingness to move far from their parents and their families. Okay, let's talk now about some things involving businesses. First of all, as I said before, there might be a lot of small business failures, and that large corporations could be the beneficiaries. But it could have secondary effects as well. First of all, potential firm owners, entrepreneurs might be more reluctant to start small businesses in the future. If you realize that you've spent 20 years building up a small business and it could be gone in like 3 months if there's another pandemic, I think people are going to be very wary about starting small businesses unless the government commits to bailing out small businesses if something like this were to happen in the future. Also, it might affect the behavior of small businesses. They might choose to keep more cash on hand to insure against something like a COVID-19. And if they keep more cash on hand, they'd be less likely to spend money on expanding their business. Again, we might see more remote working, so it's beneficial for workers to work remotely, but it's also beneficial to firms. They can save money by having employees working in their homes instead of in company facilities, so they can save on the cost of constructing and maintaining buildings, physical buildings. Also, it's likely that more meetings between companies will be held remotely, so between like clients and suppliers. So instead of going to, fly out to another city to have a meeting, people are really used to using Zoom. So I think that's there's going to be a lot more business meetings held remotely instead of in person, and that would negatively affect the airline, hotel, and restaurant industries that kind of cater towards business travelers. Also, I think there'll be changes in the government. First of all, they'll be much more prepared to handle unemployment claims. A lot of the systems were overwhelmed, and people spent like days trying to get online and weren't able to. So I think they're going to be upgraded. I think government's going to be more prepared to help out small businesses. So with the CARES Act, there are about 30 million small businesses in the U.S. And how do you know which businesses are most deserving? Maybe the government's going to allow businesses to give them data about their profitability, collect that data, so they're more prepared to distribute any kind of funds in a more rational way instead of on a first come, first served basis. Another change we might see is that the government may respond to future downturns by giving stimulus checks instead of increasing government spending. So with the 2009 stimulus package, there were tax rebates, but they were much smaller than in the current situation. But there was more spending on infrastructure. With the 2020 stimulus package, they're much more generous. Checks of $1,200 per individual, $2,400 per married couple, plus $500 per child. And that seems to be, I think, more popular with most people. So I think in the future, we'll see a response to economic downturns, more direct payments to individuals and less spending on infrastructure. Which also might be a call for universal basic income. For example, Andrew Yang proposed that every American 18-year-old or older get a check for $1,000 a month from the government, which would be financed by a value-added tax, which is basically a tax on consumption. So the VAT needed to finance universal basic income would be about 18 to 20%. So this would mean, first of all, that job loss would be not as economically devastating if you had that to fall back on. Studies have shown that UBI results in less stress, and universal basic income would also help with the issue of income inequality. People with low consumption would be net gainers, while people with high consumption would be net losers. So it'll help with this problem as well. One final issue is we have an increase in our national debt. And how should we handle that? The national debt at the beginning of 2020 was about $23.2 trillion. During 2020, we're projected to borrow an additional $3.7 trillion, or 17% of GDP, which is almost twice as much as the previous record post-World War II. So the projected national debt at the end of 2020 will be about $27 trillion, or 125% of GDP. So what do we do about this increased debt? Our options are to increase taxes, decrease spending, or monetize the debt, basically printing money to finance the debt, or just live with a higher debt to GDP ratio. Japan has a higher debt to GDP ratio, about 200%. So do we live with that? So that's something that politicians will be talking.
I'm sorry, didn't have my sound on. Our next speaker, thank you, Carl. Our next speaker is Dr. Norman Walzer. Norm, you can start whenever you're ready. Thank you. Norm, we can't hear you. Your sound is not on.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Sorry,
yes.
I misread the thing. Basically, what we've been working with is communities that are relatively small, in many cases below, say, 1,000 population. And there are many of them in this area as well, but they're really across the state. And as you look at the state of Illinois, there's about 700 cities, municipalities, that are actually smaller than 1,000 population. And southern Illinois, particularly southeastern, is really an area where they're kind of focused. But there's a lot of them spread in northwestern Illinois and areas as well. So those particular communities are suffering kind of a long-term series of negative effects. One of them is that they're having population declines, and have had declines for better part 10, 15 years with the mechanization of agriculture and without migration of young adults and people that are pursuing higher education. And as they get higher education, higher degrees, then the types of pay that they need to compensate for the education, or what they expect at least, is in fact more than what you can get in the smaller communities. So we've had kind of an out-migration of jobs, as well with the mechanization of manufacturing, as well as agriculture. We're now talking about farms that are 1,000 acres or more. When I grew up in the farm a long time ago, we were at 250 acres, and that was probably considered a good average farm. But so we're certainly headed beyond that, and with artificial intelligence, it'll get even larger. So this is going to have a negative effect on the rural counties particularly. And we look at rural counties typically in our work as being the non-Chicago metro areas, the non-downstate metro areas, and then everything else we're considering rural. We sometimes abstract the micropolitan counties as well. So anyhow, it's a very serious kind of situation that's going on in these areas. So the long-term population declines are likely to cause some significant problems, as we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But particularly, we're starting to see some effects now on shortages of labor work. So when you don't have enough skilled workers in the rural areas, then businesses are having difficulties expanding, and in some cases may be unwilling actually to invest in those areas. The second trend that's going on, and again, it's a long-term trend and something that's going to continue for a good 10 to 15 years in the future, is the growth in the elderly residents. And this is really an outcome of the baby boom generation, and as it ages, it passes through. The metropolitan areas tend to be attracting some elderly residents due to family reasons. There's been a shift in the paradigm. It used to be that the older people or that the younger people came back to their home communities and be with the older family members. In this case, the family members are now moving towards to the places where the children have gone. So the children are relocating in the larger centers, and in fact, some of the older family members do as well. In addition to that, the healthcare facilities tend to be better in the larger communities. So rural, again, we'll talk in a bit, rural is having some difficulty with stabilizing the finances of hospitals and some of the healthcare, although this will be changing in the future, I think, with the advent increases in the internet capacity. So really the growth in elderly residents is good and bad in a sense. The metro areas are attracting the elderly for reasons we talked about, but the elderly really are choosing rural areas because of lifestyle. And we're seeing more interest in moving to a less complicated area, simpler lifestyle, as long as it has the kind of facilities and the kind of environment where the people really can enjoy themselves and be creative and various things. The social interaction rates high in a lot of the surveys of people and why they choose different kinds of locations. But the situation basically is that rural does have some opportunities in the future, but the trend that we're basically headed towards is smaller rural areas, counties, particularly in cities, but also older groups. Now, what does that mean? Well, when you lose the population base because the population declines, or if in fact your population ages and they probably spend less money on retirement, they may actually qualify for property tax abatements and these kinds of things, senior citizens exemption programs. And these kinds of things affect the cities themselves, but they also directly affect the businesses. And the businesses are also, the ones in the rural areas, are being hit hard by the internet purchases. And anyone who's familiar with small towns or in the rural areas particularly, if you're more than 40 or so years old, you could probably remember the general stores, kind of, you could call them dime stores or monkey wards, those kinds of places, that they actually had businesses in the small towns. Those, of course, are long gone. So what we're left with now is really more accommodation type of businesses, lifestyle types of businesses, places where people can interact. Particularly important are grocery stores and these types of enterprises. What this is leading to now is that many of the smaller communities are facing the issue that their grocery store owner is approaching retirement age, or in many cases beyond retirement age. They're basically thinking about closing, thinking about retiring full times. So a community may lose its grocery store, as an example, or it may lose some other essential businesses, maybe restaurants. And grocery stores and restaurants are usually in the smaller communities really highly priced, and are needed to attract the people coming in. So essentially, if you think of a small town, particularly, you're really thinking about it's dependent on tourism. If there's a unique kind of feature that it has that can bring people in, those people spend money into small businesses. We've got a recent trend where some of the people that are in the small towns are basically turning more to hobbies and crafts and starting to market some of the unique things in the small towns, even in this area as well. Shabanow, for example, has one or two, I guess the second store is open now, where they're dealing with unique local kind of arts and activities. The retail basically is changing a bit in the sense that it's really getting smaller, and we just have to recognize it. Now, what is the vulnerability to the pandemic? We have a presence in small towns, particularly of high-contact businesses, accommodation-type businesses, retail, non-essential type businesses in our recent discussions, tourism, personal care type services. Those are the ones that, as you look at the impact of Federal Reserve Bank's recent study and others, those are the types of industries that, in fact, are being hit by the pandemic. So we're looking at some serious blows at that point. The second issue, though, is that some of the businesses, because, as I mentioned earlier, because they're really reaching retirement age, are really, they're semi-retired, or they're hobby enterprises. Maybe they're only open a few days a week, whatever it is. And it makes the business attraction potential not very good in the smaller communities. And this, I think, has been common for quite a while in the antique stores, where you have people that operate an antique store, but it's partly a hobby, but so they take off for several days a week to go to a hobby or to a antique show or various things. So it means that it's hard to attract a steady clientele to that community. And in the smaller communities, the businesses really are much more dependent on whether the community is a good place to come to or a desirable place to come to, because it's not necessarily in the middle of all kinds of other activities. So it's kind of an important issue. Another issue that we mentioned briefly was the idea of healthcare. The hospitals in the rural areas, in many cases, are not financially strong. They were hit hard by not being able to do elective surgery. So there's discussions of anywhere of 15 to 20% of the rural hospitals possibly in financial risk. This would be a serious concern if, in fact, we have a second wave of the pandemic. If we do have a second wave, what's going to happen is that the rural people, most of whom in the rural counties, are actually working in larger centers. So if in fact they work in the larger centers and in fact contract virus and bring it back to the rural areas, it's going to spread fairly quickly. And in fact, there may not be the health support services to be able to take care of it. So that's an issue that I think we have to pay some attention to. We're seeing now that rural commuting times, as is urban actually, but rural commuting times have increased. And this is partly because the economy is changing. With the information economy, we're seeing a lot of the growth happening in larger communities where there are many high-tech skills people available that can basically do the job. They're kind of on the cutting edge. We're seeing now the growth of sort of intermediate or regional kind of centers. And Dixon is a good example. We just finished a report on, or a research brief in the Center for the Governmental Studies on Dixon as an example of a place that's really, it's not a large city, not a small city. It's in the middle of an area. People can commute. They can live there to commute to Rockford, to Quad Cities, wherever. But it really is becoming a very pleasant place to live. And this is really the focus, I think, of a lot of the smaller communities, and is going to really tie into what kind of businesses they're going to try to attract and the success of those businesses. But the bottom line, I think, is that the local governments, particularly in the rural, smaller towns, are really relying heavily on sales taxes, property tax revenues, these kinds of things. So the population declines, the loss of sales are really going to hit them fairly hard. So what strategies do rural areas have? Well, the ones that we've been working with are thinking about bringing in more tourists. And they're trying to make the center unique. They're trying to cause people to want to get away from the larger center for a weekend or whatever it is. And they're trying to basically stimulate the economy. The preferences that I've seen recently are that people, as was indicated earlier, people are indicating they would like to travel shorter distances. And so this is probably car trips. So this could benefit the rural areas if they're in proximity to a larger center. Some of the communities we're working with are looking at local B&Bs. So this would be another type of small business, but it's not going to be ever a big employer, but essentially it's someone that could be very useful in making the community a more exciting place to be. The second thing that they're working with is trying to figure out some ways to help the current businesses support or trying to market community-wide in order to support the current businesses. And there's been some work, as was mentioned by previous speaker, by trying to get businesses to be able to sell over the internet. We did a fair amount of work in Western Illinois, Northwestern Illinois, probably 6 or 8 years ago, trying to get businesses trained so in fact they could buy and sell over the internet, these kinds of activities, but clearly market over the internet. There's some interesting activities. LaSalle, for example, has a citywide card that operates basically as a gift card. So essentially anybody can buy it and buy the card and give it as a gift or a promotion or whatever, and then it can be spent anywhere in the community. And the idea is to buy locally rather than to buy out of the community. They're also working to strengthen their identity. A bit of a branding, but I don't really like the word branding because it kind of implies a logo. But this is more of what do we stand for, what's unique about our area. A couple of the communities we've been working with here is they want to have a rural identity, and this is something that they feel that the larger communities want to get out and spend more time in. And I think it has some effect. The issue then also is how do you identify potential supply chain opportunities? So in Macomb or in DeKalb, for example, if we're bringing in some fairly large employers, like a candy company being one, business being another, what kind of suppliers will they have, and what kind of where could those suppliers locate? Could they locate in some of the communities in the surrounding area? And how do we somehow make that happen? So those are some strategies that we're seeing in the smaller communities that will ultimately generate some additional businesses, hopefully. There's also an issue, though, of how do we transition some of these businesses that may close, either due to retirements or due to the pandemic. And community supported enterprises is something we've been working with quite a bit, and actually have a guidebook on our webpage where this is a situation where a grocery store closes, as an example, or a restaurant closes, and the residents are actually pooling their money, and then they're going in, buying the building, they're reopening it, and they're operating it either as a nonprofit or as an LLC or as a cooperative, but they're hiring a manager and basically just making it more of a general store. And so it may have started as a grocery store, but what it sells now is maybe crafts and other kind of activities that were made locally. This is very popular in Vermont, and there are several examples that I can give you even in Illinois. The Toulon, for example, which is down near the Peoria area, reopened a grocery store. It closed, and then they reopened a second one in a different location. It turned the first one into an office space. So people have invested their money. It's kind of a donation. They didn't expect any return, but essentially they have now started a business or reopened a business, and it's working. Red Tire is another interesting kind of example at the University of Kansas in the School of Business. And essentially there, what they're doing is creating a website, and they're basically trying to match the businesses that want, or people that want to get out of business, with the people who in fact are interested in buying a business or investing in a business. Seems to have been working pretty well. It's a no cost to either the person wanting to buy the business or the person wanting to sell, and the college will provide technical support after the transition occurs. So it's an attempt to basically make things happen. And then finally, we're seeing quite a few communities that are trying to make their businesses, and Texas has a good example, but quite a few communities are trying to make their communities more age-friendly. They want to retain residents, not just elderly-friendly, but actually keep them in. And the Gallup poll in just last year indicated 31% of the elderly residents they would prefer to live in rural, and only 22% of them live there. So there is a serious interest in being in the rural areas, and the AARP has a couple of programs that are functioning that way. These are some additional readings if when you get the recording, if you want to see them, of things that we've done in terms of growth of community supported enterprises and various activities. And with that, I'll just say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Our next speaker is Federico Ciamarella. You may begin anytime you're ready.
Thanks, I will, Judy, and thanks again for inviting me. Always exciting. As always, I'm learning something new, and as I showed you before, and for the audience, I have my STEM outreach glasses that I appreciate from previous engagements. So always a pleasure to be a part of this. So this is great here. I want to thank everyone for listening. Really what I wanted to talk about is manufacturing in the United States in general, and kind of how things have been going, and talk a little bit about MXD. If those of you who don't know what MXD is, I'll talk about that. But I have to say it's been amazing how manufacturers and the community has responded to this pandemic, trying to provide support and outreach. And I really do think that there will be some growth in this area and some opportunities. And really what we're here to do is to support that and ensure that U.S. manufacturing grows and thrives into this digital age. So MXD, as Judy had mentioned, this is manufacturing times digital. We are actually one of 14 manufacturing innovation institutes. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. And you can see here, I'm not sure if you see my mouse, but they're kind of all across the country. So back in that crisis that was talked about in 2008, 2009, this idea of standing up these institutes as a public-private partnership. So you have funding from the government. In this case, 8 of these institutes, one of we are located in Chicago, is funded by the Department of Defense. We also have members that pay a membership to be in there. So this is this kind of public-private. And so really our goal is to solve problems that are too big for any one entity to solve, right? So all these institutes have different focuses. You have America Makes, which is one of the first ones in additive manufacturing, Power America. You have all these different institutes. And really, I like to say that MXD is the thread that ties them all together because we're talking about digital manufacturing. So that's both a blessing and a curse sometimes. So just some quick facts. As I mentioned, DoD had recognized the importance to secure the defense industrial base and manufacturing in general in the U.S. Without that support, it would be very difficult. And we've even seen, and I'm sure you've probably heard the word supply chain thrown around so many times now on the news because of that. And this is something that we've preached from day one when we launched in 2014. How do we provide the tools and the skill sets to empower our manufacturers? So we're actually now the second oldest. So we've just received our additional contract and funding for another 5 years. We have over 250 members across the country supporting this ecosystem. And the exciting thing, but also as you'll see, and as we've been pivoting, we have a 22,000 square foot facility that kind of demonstrates really what digital manufacturing is, because you hear about it, Industry 4.0. What does that really mean? Again, I'll talk more about that, but really we're here to educate and empower the manufacturing community in that sense. So we've actually, since we've started, over 63 projects that we've funded, about $90 million invested. This is both from the government and from private companies. And really the idea here is to focus that R&D into practice, right? And I'm not going to go through these projects. We have lots of these. You can go to our website, which I'll talk more about later to detail some of these programs. But really is how do we drive this innovation and make these companies become more resilient and adaptive? And I think what you'll see is those companies that have that mantra and have been kind of adopting digital technologies, whether it be using a computer versus paper. I mean, that to us is a digital transformation, and people sometimes often overlook that. It can be very transformative. Outside of the three projects that I talked about, and I'll just jump back because I skipped ahead. So we focus on product development, future factory, which is part of our factory floor where we demonstrate those things, in supply chain. So this has always been in our wheelhouse. And, I guess in the silver lining of all these things, we now see how manufacturers and the government and even public understand why it's so critical to care about these things, right? Because it means products quicker to your facility that are locally sourced with materials that can be reliable. On top of that, as you've heard and probably seen, cybersecurity is a huge area of concern. And so in 2019, we were designated the National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing. With that funding, we started developing some pilot programs around, again, providing low-cost tools for manufacturers to be able to become more secure and understand how one can do, especially now as we've worked, now we're moving to work from home. What are the things we do? And I'll talk more about some webinars that we've had on those topics, and again, educating the public and educating our membership to understand what that is. There's a nice video here. I'm not going to go to it, but we will make these slides available. So I encourage you to look through that talks more about the details. But really what I want to focus in on two things. Education, which we now are launching some programs in partnership with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. This will be some online cybersecurity content that anyone can take. Again, the idea is that we're going to provide certificates, badges, credentials that will enable people to now reactivate themselves into the marketplace. And we knew this was going to be important. Actually, 35% of all cyber attacks, cyber espionage, happen to manufacturers. And just to put that in perspective, 98% of our manufacturers in the U.S. are considered small to medium businesses, right? So we're talking less than 200, and sometimes I think 78% of that's less than 20 employees. So when you're thinking cybersecurity, right, that's like your son who's the whiz kid who's going to do your cybersecurity for you, which, you know, sometimes works, but right, we need to kind of move beyond that and provide the tools so people can become more secure. Because ultimately, in that, your weakest link becomes the vulnerability, and we've seen that happen time and time again. So we spend a lot of time educating, informing, creating these low-cost tools. The other thing is this hiring guide that we'll be launching out in this next month or so, that we did in conjunction with Manpower, to where we've identified over 240 roles in cybersecurity. So these are future opportunities that we see that are going to be needed to be filled by you know, manufacturers, by people in the U.S. And so these roles aren't tied to specific jobs. I just want to be clear, there may be jobs or opportunities that are defined in one or two roles. So it'll just be dependent upon the company, the size of the company, and what they're trying to do. But going back to some of the things that we were talking about earlier, I think there are opportunities for growth and opportunities for new educational paths for people that might be looking for that, and that's one area. So I think this is very important to highlight. I think also what is important to know is we have the MXD Learn platform, and this kind of dovetails what I was just talking about in cybersecurity, is how do we educate people on these digital skills and these digital tools. So again, these are a lot of programs that, again, for lack of time, I don't want to get into, but certainly happy to answer some questions on those. But really, it's going back to what can we do in terms of apprenticeship. So we have Ignite curriculum that we're doing actually with Waukegan High School, where sophomores to seniors are getting exposed to advanced manufacturing. We've weaved into this a cybersecurity component, but we're working with the College of Lake County, where once they finish this curriculum, they'll actually have 18 credits towards a associate's degree in mechatronics, which again is a pathway to then, which we know from Northern, a lot of our students from engineering had come from the College of Lake County. So again, a great connection point for furthering your education. But tied to that are these apprenticeships that we have with the local area in Waukegan, that now these students can start to get experience in this area of cybersecurity where, you know, again, there's a high demand. So this is something that has been very exciting for us. And we're looking to expand this program to other areas. I know we've been in talks with Rockford region and other areas in Illinois, because we feel this is a great opportunity to really educate and inform students the opportunity that cybersecurity possess in terms of jobs. So this hiring guide that I talked about should be coming out soon. It actually has profiles and pathways for students. What are the income expectations in terms of, if I go down this path, what can I get in terms of jobs and income security. So this is something that I think is very exciting, and you should be hearing more about this as we move forward. So I want to kind of pivot and talk about this resiliency and flexibility. As I mentioned, we're an institute. We're really focused on delivering projects. We're really focused on educating. But when this pandemic hit, we were used to having people at our facilities, doing workshops, doing tours, educating, informing, and so we quickly also had to pivot. And so we created this virtual programming. Again, if you click the link, you can see we have about 10 or so programs that we've delivered with our partners, actually on communicating in a crisis, like right, not being tone deaf, and important things when it comes to marketing and things like that, to what is the federal government doing in terms of stimulus and opportunities for companies. And so I would encourage you to look on those. Some of these are free and some of them are member contents. We then launched our COVID page rather quickly as well. This is providing resources and opportunities, kind of lessons learned. In fact, that kind of leads to the other bullet, where we recognized and saw that there was a need for PPE, so face shields and things like this. So we quickly looked, even though we weren't set up for manufacturing because we have these discrete test cells, we quickly pivoted, and our VP of engineering was able to, in a matter of days, design this face mask, and we started producing them, and we actually donated to over 150 masks, and we were only limited by the raw materials that we could no longer get to produce these face shields to frontline workers across the U.S. And we made these deliveries. And this was, very heartwarming because we started to see, how other people's wanted to help. And so we were connecting and making sure that everyone was staying informed and kept and had their PPE. We're looking to see as these materials resume if we could make some more, because there's obviously still a need. This isn't going away, but we've looked at other things that we can make and fabricate. But on top of that, we've now provided all that, and I'm going back to the COVID page, where we have the instructions. How do you make these things? These are all locally sourced parts again, the procedures to do it, what you need to fabricate them. And again, this is kind of what we're trying to do to inform and support in these efforts. On the lighter side, we launched not too long ago Deb from QA. So this is kind of, again, a great kind of news editorial on, when you're trying to learn about what 5G is and its impact in manufacturing, or should I invest in digital technologies? So Deb gives her kind of advice on this, and it's, very poignant. And so, we really have got a lot of great feedback on Deb from QA, and some of the more lighter moments as she's relating to her experiences when she was coming up the chains in the manufacturing industry and what she's seen and the changes. So, I think our members and others have really enjoyed this. I just want to end with saying that, what I've seen and kind of the takeaways, as I said, in manufacturing is this flexibility and adaptability. And I understand these are nervous and difficult times, but often those that have succeeded, and we have many partners that have done this, and I can name a few, but at risk of leaving people out, I'll just say they've used these crises as opportunities to grow and to learn more. So switching to these digital technologies, how do we do better social distancing in this area? So we're talking about the use of cobots, right? So it's not that we're going to replace humans, but we're going to work with robots in a meaningful way so that we can continue operations without really needing to provide any other, harm to individuals. And how do we control those environments? But this digital idea, and I think was alluded to earlier in terms of the hygiene of companies and how they're doing, how we can support them. All this is going to have to happen through this digital framework. And so we've been a long proponent of that. We are steadily working on a lot of projects, and hopefully in the coming months or so, you'll hear about these projects, national efforts that we're working with a lot of top companies that are really invested in. And this is what really is the heartwarming part. As I said, obviously, we live in a capitalist society. This is, I think, one of the great things. Sometimes that can be misinterpreted, but I would say across the board, all of our top tier partners, even our tier 3 partners, what can I do to help? Not like, how do I profit off of this? What can I do to help? That was always the first response looking at this. And to me, that really speaks and resonates of, what it means to be an American and face a crisis. And so, I just want to thank you again for the time. I know we're kind of going to be over here, but looking forward to the discussion. I think it was a very informative.
You did.
Maybe caught her off guard.
I was having trouble. There we go. All right. Telling everybody else, don't forget the second step for the camera, and here I am forgetting it. Thank you very much, and I should say that we had planned a tour, Federico and I, with MXD for June, but we canceled that for obvious reasons. But we will look to do that again, so those of you that are listening and would be interested, watch for that, because when we see that it is makes sense to do that. We had planned on having a bus coming from DeKalb and Naperville to go there, but it is neat to see the place and to have a tour of it, which I had the privilege of doing. And anyway, right now, if you would like to take a few minutes to write down some questions, we'll have a Q&A and a sharing, and I see that there's some economists on that list. So I think that we will definitely have some also comments that are from experts as well that are attending here tonight. So we'll just give you a couple minutes, get that.
Yeah, and maybe Judy, if you don't mind, I'll just add because I was thinking about that, and it was mentioned about remote working. I do see that a lot of companies, where it makes sense, are pivoting to remote working. They were surprised at how effective it has become, right? And so I think some will pivot to that, and it's just an interesting fact, and I think people have become very resilient when it comes
Well, I think
to
that's interesting
delivering
because
in the
I
situations
think a
that
lot of
make
people
them feel
stepped up
most
to the
comfortable.
plate and found that they had skills that they didn't think they had before, and were able to push themselves forward. And some of our audience have said to me, like, "Oh, now that we've had these virtual STEM cafes, could we have a combination when we get back together?" And that kind of thing. So, the audience is spoiled. Um, So anyway, do put some questions out there. Get another drink if you need to. I guess you did such a thorough job. They don't have any questions or comments.
I will say, just perhaps also one nice thing about technology, and if you're not aware of it, there's a app called Slido, and it's kind of an interactive, so you can post questions on the web, and then people can kind of, just post a response. So it's a little more anonymous. I know sometimes in this environment, maybe people feel, although I doubt with this crowd, knowing this crowd, that they're going to be shy. It seems to be a fairly nice tool. So Slido, something to check out.
While we're waiting, I do want to tell you that we still have STEM Fest planned for October 31st. And we certainly don't know how that will be, but I work with a very creative team, and so we'll probably come up with something very unique and interesting. So we will be getting the word out, but that's October 31st, and of course we all hope that we're exactly back the way we were before, but I don't think that ever is going to happen again. I think we've, as we said before, I think we've learned some things. And going forward, what can we take from this that is very positive? And I think there are a lot of things, actually. And part of what you said, Federico, that there are a lot of really good people out there that are helping others during this time. So we have to remember that. And the other thing is, don't forget about these virtual STEM camps, which are great opportunities for students, I think grades 3 through 12, but lots of monies out there. People have been so generous to try to put some students into some camps this summer. And they will not be just like your everyday classroom. They have some really fun activities. And if you don't have the materials, they send them to you in the mail. So it's quite cool.
So it looks like the questions are coming in. John, thank you for your question. What surprised me most in the survey results? Honestly, that 6% of people kind of not being ready to, or only 6% being ready to go out on the opening day. Also, those stats, we went over them quick at the end, but the importance of digital technologies for small businesses and how important that is for a small business to not only have a clear and up-to-date website, but also kind of an active social media to connect with their consumers, in addition to a Google My Business page. So
Okay,
when
I
you
have a
think
question
about
here.
the individual entrepreneur and kind of what we consumers are expecting out of them, it's kind of a lot. So I'm with Federico on this.
I just
on
Right,
the learning
realized
no, I
possibilities.
didn't see that
Make
before.
sure that a
Questions,
local
I'll
small
let you
business
go.
owner
anyway,
takes
the
advantage
first
of
one here
the
is,
position with Northern
in the
Illinois or some of our
manufacturing
community colleges.
arena, how does our cybersecurity compare to China's capability?
That's a great question. Obviously, this is a big concern. I think that we're definitely doing really good things. I think the problem, as I said before, it's usually your weakest link, right? So we have learned in some instances where you now have hardware, right? Say like a phone, and I think this happened with either the iPhone or one of the phones where they actually had embedded chips that were not known, that were taking and recording data and tracking things. So that was something that I think was a little bit alarming from that standpoint. But I would say that we're doing very well. I think we're very aware of what is going on with these kind of entities, and I think as I said, the biggest thing we can continue to do is to make people aware and to educate and empower them, so that
Anybody
we
else
don't
have a comment about
find
that?
ourselves in trouble.
Okay, we'll go to the next one. Federico, what area of supply chains do you expect to be most impacted when we return from COVID-19 and move back to a new normal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really going to be across the board. From what I have heard, that in China, there is potentially, because this is now the season, I guess, when things start going back as they're ramping up, but they're not ramping up as much. So I think up to 1 million businesses that will be going out, if they haven't already, out of business. So things like when you're ordering a computer and normally you'd get it the next day, it might be, a couple of months. Raw materials certainly are a concern. But in that sense, as I said, we have been creative and responsive, and I think this is where the DoD has understood that we need to kind of address these kind of in the short term, but also kind of a long-term strategy. So if we do come back to where we have a pandemic or some crisis, are there alternate supply chains that we can source locally or from other areas that would enable us to kind of stem the tide? Locally sourced materials, alternative materials development. So I think those are some things that are really exciting. But yeah, I would say materials and electronics, definitely, I think you'll continue to see an impact over the coming years.
Anybody else have any comments on that?
See how people
Okay, we'll go
respond.
to the next one. Where is MXD located?
I forgot. Number one thing to do, right? We're in Chicago, literally on Goose Island. So if you're familiar with Chicago, we're on Goose Island, just west of Division and west of Halstead, north of Division. So great location, free parking, so you can't beat that. So
Okay, the next question is for Maya. What surprised you the most in your survey results? What was the most unexpected and important to note?
Yeah,
And of course, you're getting compliments. So, to all of you presenters. The next question is, do you foresee the global economy getting worse before it gets better? Sounds good.
I guess is that for me? Okay. I think it probably will get worse before it gets better. These things are so hard to predict because we've never seen such a quick downturn. So there are some positives. I mean, obviously, states are opening up and jobs are coming back, but then there are people, who have lost their jobs and aren't going to get them back, and they might remain unemployed for a while. So I'm thinking we're going to have a recovery, but we'll probably hit but it's probably going to be a slow recovery.
Anybody else have a comment?
Yeah, I would just say also, I think it also depends on where you're standing, right? I think, again, from a manufacturing standpoint, things will be tough, but I think ultimately we will probably be better positioned than where we were going into this. So maybe if it's that kind of wake-up call that we needed. But I think, and I think was alluded to earlier, is knowing that this income inequality has been exacerbated. And I think it's incumbent upon us to, as we do get better, to make sure that we try to, target that and improve that rather than let it continue to grow. Because I think that will just obviously compound it if the next crisis.
And just
or
one other
happens.
comment.
So
I just want you to know that yesterday the Packers sent me a mask with a Packer logo on it. I know the rest of you don't appreciate it, but
nice.
all right. Here's one, MXD. I'm interested in knowing more about. Wait a minute, I'm losing this. Okay, and knowing more about what are the gaps in manufacturing knowledge among manufacturing. My impression is that manufacturers are usually aware of the commercial products available and the methodologies required to use them, and when they don't adopt the most up-to-date, help me out, somebody, I lost it.
Yeah. So basically, he's asking, or saying the question is, they look at these things and see the technologies, they're aware of them, but usually don't adopt them because of financial reasons or organizational structures, and that's absolutely right. And I just hopefully that's a great point, because I want to clarify it. So we're not trying to sell new technologies or new things. What we're trying to get people to understand is that digital technologies, and I'll give you a quick example, can help you become more efficient at what you do, right? So if you have a bad process, right, and you're manufacturing it, if you digitize it, you're just going to make a bad process faster, okay? So it's not going to improve your process. But for example, and on the shop floor you'll see this, we have a web camera that's looking at an analog gauge, right? So usually, if you think about an analog gauge, gas pressure in this case, usually have a guy that's walking around, taking the clipboard and doing readings, whatever, every hour. With the webcam and with an app, you can now get that on your phone. So it has a digital tracker that tracks the gauge pressure, and if it trips, you get a notification. So now the person that spent time walking around on the floor looking at gauges can spend more time on engineering design or whatever it is. And so you really think about it that way. So but when I say education, it's not like, hey, look at this new great tool. It's more about, hey, how can you improve your facilities in a digital way? And it doesn't have to be using the latest and greatest. It's just simple solutions, and understanding that if you can adopt those, and that really, it's the culture. To your point, I think, is obviously it's risky to make those changes, especially when you're doing large investments. But if you could start with small incremental changes and see those differences, the return on investments, then you might take the bigger leaps if you need to. Again, I'm not preaching, always buy the latest and greatest. I'm just saying, how do you become more digitally savvy using technologies in a way that's
Has anyone
affordable
seen a
and
demand for
meaningful
touchless technologies? If so, any examples?
Yeah, so I would say I'm thinking just of like my phone, right? The face recognition. I think you might start seeing more of that. I mean, I haven't seen outside of that, but certainly I think there are some discussions of how do we use things like digital light projection systems. So as I'm projecting things on to a surface where I don't really have to interact, I can just kind of use like kind of a connect box, sensor where I can locate a position and things like that.
Right, this is regarding Dr. Walsh's talk.
Examples.
How can local governments overcome fiscal problems that arise from the aging of the population and the removal of retail from within the city limits?
Those are really the challenges. It's a question of if you're heavily reliant upon property tax base, which most everybody is, and sales tax, then you're really in front line to be hit. There's no easy solution other than to somehow build the business sector or attract new investment into the community. And I've been kind of interested, and I was going to raise a question, but if in fact we have a relative shortage of workers, which has been one of the issues in the rural areas, will in fact they attract people or attract businesses that are more highly automated? So you have a higher capital labor ratio, and that would presumably raise the wage. And so you would end up with wealthier people or people earning a higher wage living in their communities. That doesn't directly answer the question. I don't know that there is really a direct answer to the question of finances. It's a question of you really have user fees and these kinds of activities, but there really aren't a lot of options as the economy erodes in small towns.
And that's, I think, in the speculation realm, do you think the milkman delivery will come back? So some are saying that.
I'll go ahead and take this one. So Oberweis, local, definitely. I actually, our family utilizes that, and they have seen an increase in sales immensely. They were, doing great. So I think this does bring up the idea that delivery and kind of subscription.
Thank you. This question is for Dr. Campbell. Given the variation in state fiscal capacity and the variation in the severity of COVID-19's impact across the states and regions, how should A, state fiscal policy respond, and B, how federal fiscal aid/assistance should be structured?
I guess my views about this, there should be some kind of formula, I would say, based on both the state's population and the number of COVID cases within the state. I mean, it shouldn't depend on the state's, prior fiscal position. I can see why people think it's unfair, but I think it should depend on both the population and prevalence of COVID cases within the state. To the extent that the federal government doesn't borrow, that doesn't cover all the costs.
Anybody else have anything on that? Okay, we get. Okay. All right, the next question. And again, thank you for all your wonderful talks here. Here's the next question. Will the massively increasing debt of the United States under the current administration that has been augmented
1 year and then being fine the next?
I'm losing
it's
this
best,
question.
Spread it out.
Can anybody read it or see it?
Yeah, I think it says, so you said the augmented even more by the COVID-19 response affect the long-term implications for the dollar continuing as the premier international currency. This is a real issue that has implications for the U.S. economy.
Yeah, I mean, the question, I think the government needs to take action to reduce the debt to GDP ratio, not by making it all up at once, but even if they could, going forward, have balance, try to balance budgets, either, by some combination of tax increases and spending cuts. If we could balance the budget, then the debt to GDP ratio would just gradually go down over time. After World War II, the debt to GDP ratio was very high, almost as high as it is now.
All right, next question. It seemed that rural areas are in a particularly poor situation with loss of young to urban areas and retention of some elderly who desire the aesthetics of rural areas. Has COVID-19 changed this trend in a worse manner than already happening? Or is it just a blip in a trend already occurring?
Presumably that's to me. I think it's been too early. Obviously, we've only been in the virus for a couple of months, so we don't have any serious patterns. And most of the data that you look at are prior to, the data always has a couple of months lag. So I don't know whether or not the migration patterns have all changed. So the hearsay or the limited discussions that we've had, I mentioned one of them in the presentation, was that the Gallup poll suggested that in fact there may be some greater interest, and I think Carl or someone mentioned earlier that there may be some more interest in getting to a less populated area, or less densely populated area. The difficulty, I think, is that rural is not rural, in the sense that rural, as in the case of Harvard, Illinois, is very different than rural in the case of Polk County, Illinois. As a result, I think it's going to make a big difference there. So two issues. One of them is retaining the elderly. I think that's what has to happen. And the AARP has a pretty good age-friendly kind of program. They're trying to work with the communities, and they're not so much yet in rural, but I think it does have some hope, where the community tries to figure out what do the businesses need to do to be friendly to the elderly and how to be attractive to them. Texas has an elderly certification program for businesses where they can actually go through trainings and get a certification. So I think it's that kind of create an environment that will let people age in place. And I think it's the issue of not just necessarily attracting retirees, which is good, but I think it's also a question of, as people think about retiring, they retire locally. So the direct answer to the question is, I don't think the data are there yet to really know what's going to be. But as I mentioned in the earlier part of the presentation, this is just kind of an add-on to a long-term trend that rural has to deal with.
I know I was having some difficulty with the question, so I hope I didn't erase some by mistake. But anyway, we have a compliment here. Thank you all for your informative discussion, and I thank you. And so I will a couple of, and I'm going to clap. And this is something we can't do when we're doing things virtually. So there are a few things we can't do virtually. But our next virtual STEM Cafe is June 24th, 6 p.m., Backyard Wildlife, Urban Ecology and Conservation. I'm telling you, this speaker, John, has such great visual images of animals in the backyard that we are maybe not aware of while we're in bed sleeping at night. But he has cameras built out into the woods and all, and it will be a very exciting virtual STEM Cafe, I am sure. Thank you for taking your time to do this presentation. I think that it was nice to be able to talk about businesses in urban and rural and all of those different aspects. Thank you, Aline Click, our NIU Director of Web Media and E-Learning, and her staff, Raz Aldul Sarani. And also, this is going to be recorded, has been recorded, and we will need to make it accessible with the closed captioning. So I would expect that maybe a week from now. We do really value your input, so I would appreciate it if you would send me an email with some comments, maybe some new ideas for our STEM cafes, and or comments about how we can do this better. We are learning every day with this, but we do want to connect with the audience and the public and provide us feedback. And thank you very much for attending. I guess that's it. Good evening.